Good day, all. The Republican Party was founded by America's beloved President Abraham Lincoln. The party, since its inception, has evolved, especially in the last 50 years, captured by fascism, abandoning the principles it was founded upon by Abraham Lincoln, who abolished slavery and, as a result, fought the bloody Civil War and led the Union to victory. But the symptoms of the Civil War never went away completely and therefore still persist. The Republican Party now is hijacked by so-called religious conservatism to represent what is now called religious right-wing politics, playing identity politics that serves very well to fascism, as it has always been. Here's a clip of what S.C. Cupp had to say about Christianity in the United States last week.
Was Jesus woke? I'm S.E. Cupp. This is Unfiltered. I'm old enough to remember when the conservative movement was focused primarily on fiscal and social issues, national defense, the debt, the deficit, taxes, limited government, family values. The right had yet to tap into that gold mine that is the so-called culture wars, which has become the main event in modern right-wing politics. It's replaced fiscal, moral, and security concerns. It dominates the right-wing media landscape, and it's made celebrities of countless enterprising outrage peddlers. The right's singular obsession with the culture wars, owning the libs, and wokeism has become its North Star, and the effects have not been good for the country or the Republican Party. Abandoning principles in favor of cheap calorie culture wars helped lead the party to lose the House, the Senate, and the White House in just 4 years. And we have one guy to thank for that, Donald J. Trump. The former president and current presidential candidate ushered divisive culture wars into prominence, all too happy to pit Americans against each other in the name of patriotism, and of course as a way of measuring loyalty to him. After all, it's so much easier to focus on the evils of Mr. Potato Head, the green M&M kneeling for the national anthem and drag queen story hour, than it is to say balance the budget, secure our borders, end the opioid crisis, and lower poverty rates. Welp, it seems the right's infatuation with wokeism has not only infected conservatism, but Christianity too. This week, Christianity Today editor Russell Moore spoke to NPR's All Things Considered, and what he had to say was alarming. He said that Christianity in the United States is in crisis, and he blamed it squarely on the tribalism animating conservative circles. He said that multiple pastors had told him that after they'd preach Christian values, like turning the other cheek, parishioners would complain that those were liberal talking points. When the pastor would point out that he was literally quoting Jesus Christ, the parishioner would reply, "That doesn't work anymore, that's weak." So Jesus is now too woke for conservative evangelicals. Now, this is lamentable but hardly surprising. As the right makes culture wars their entire personality, things like compassion and empathy have become dirty words. Compassion is now synonymous with wokeism. Empathy and things like social safety nets have become synonymous with socialism. Caring about how punitive policies may hurt people, well, that's for the libs. This is the deleterious effect of Trumpism co-opting conservative politics. Trumpism has infected and corrupted myriad institutions once integral to conservatism. Conservative principles are now whatever Trump decides they should be. Much of conservative journalism has jettisoned journalism in favor of Trump propaganda. Support for law enforcement, the military, the intelligence community, the justice system, separation of powers, even American democracy itself, all subjected to whether or not it helps or hurts Trump. Like everything else he touched, Trump has essentially broken Christianity, like he broke conservatism, to the point where even the Bible is too woke for evangelicals. Trump has trumped Jesus.
The awakening of reality of modern-day factual truth based on scientific data and up-to-date information is sweeping across the United States, following the trend in Europe. America is a little late in facing the facts of reality. That awakening is accelerated to result in a completely new political, religious, and social landscape in 20 years. There is no such thing as alternate reality other than what can be tested repeatedly on Earth and simultaneously. There are no alternative facts that can remain as facts after rigorous tests. The myths of old that controlled the population in the past are being replaced by factual verified reality in an accelerating rate in the new millennium. Myths based on patterns of human experiences are not facts of reality. Patterns can either represent a problem or a solution to a problem. But the types of human experiences of these patterns neither identify the problem nor any solutions. Patterns are just symptoms that require further close study and analysis and tests in order to identify a problem or any solution. Patterns of visual observations and data only represent symptoms of a problem. The millennials and the youth today do not follow the old political, social, and religious metaphors to be applicable to the 21st century and beyond. Church attendances have plummeted, and church buildings are being abandoned or sold at an alarming rate with the dawn of the new millennium. Accurate information is at the fingertips of those who want to pursue them, which also makes misinformation peddlers all the more aggressive in spreading misinformation in desperate attempts to retain their base by keeping them ignorant, which is a losing battle, and they know it. As long as the peddlers of misinformation and their dependents can remain fed by their base for a while, that's all they're looking for. And with the accelerated technological advancement, the distinction between factual truth versus myths and alternative facts will become more evident and much easier. Education is not just learning skills and information that are already proven to affect the advancement of lives, but also the training of the minds to systematically observe and diagnose patterns and the understanding of their meanings and characteristics to affect the advancement of lives at large. It is the educated imaginations that can fathom the implications of patterns and their characteristics for their meanings to problems and solutions to problems in life. The human behavior of ancient tribal and cult identities translated today into identity politics that separates humans between us and them are easy tools for exploitation of ignorant minds by those who have selfish and fascist motives. Was Jesus liberal? As he was, and his liberal teachings were at odds with the so-called right-wing conservatives of his day. Today, the church cults formed in his name, totally against his teachings, translated his teachings to feel a false identity to oppose the opposition to their chosen political interests and hypocritical social values that are designed to secure their monetary and power-hungry interest above all. Here's a clip from Leja Miller, who puts it very well.
Multiple criminal charges, a history of romantic and financial infidelity, more bankruptcy declarations under his belt than you can count, a pathological liar. And yet with each new indictment, the party of law and order and of good Christian values is closer than ever to nominating Donald Trump as their frontrunner yet again. And with each new indictment, Trump gets a surge of support at the polls and in his pocket as he leverages the witch hunt against him to fire up his base of supporters, mostly working class folks, to give him, a millionaire, their money. The reason for Trump's initial rise to power in 2016 and his continued status as the most behemoth figure in Republican politics today is based on a number of things, from disinformation to a rise in populist fascism around the world to mass manipulation, the likes of which are typically reserved for cults and mind control. This is why America can't seem to shake the cult of Donald Trump. Politics isn't what's best for America or what your constituents actually want. It's about figuring out which one or two wedge issues their base will get riled up enough about to show up to the polls for. Berkeley scholars have found that Trump won with an unexpected coalition of white working class and middle class voters who were motivated by resentment. The culture and economy gave them no recognition and no respect for their work. Their jobs were shifting overseas or lost to automation. They perceived that Black, Latina, and Asian people and immigrants are advancing at their expense. How do his supporters, who are more likely to be Christian and to value law and order, rectify their beliefs that their support of a proven adulterer, compulsive liar, millionaire tax cheat, and now multiple times charged criminal defendant?
Trump is blocking witnesses.
I don't care.
Oh.
The answer lies less in politics or logic and more in populism, mind control, and cults. According to scholar of 20th century authoritarian politics Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Trump differed from past heads of state of either party in having zero interest in public welfare or consensus politics. His goals were autocratic, amassing power, domesticating the GOP, and having his financial and other personal interests prevail over national ones in shaping domestic and foreign policy. His presidency was unprecedented in the United States, but we've seen this before elsewhere in history. Juan Perón ruled over Argentina after a coup in 1943 and stated him as the head of a military dictatorship. However, by 1946, fascism was really not cool anymore, so fascist rulers were like, rats, we need a rebrand. And they saw democratic elections as a means of legitimizing their rule. So in 1946, he ran on a populist ticket, winning the presidential election in Argentina and becoming the first populist leader in history to come to power. Perón's populism shared some pretty foggy gray areas with fascism. For example, he didn't like liberal politics, he denounced ruling elites, undercut the legitimacy of independent journalism, espoused a deep dislike of pluralism and political tolerance, and cultivated a cult of personality that allowed him to be democratically elected despite his decidedly undemocratic authoritarian principles. Sound familiar? Other populist leaders came to power, blurring the lines of democracy and pushing their countries closer to autocracy and fascism. Leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil, Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, promote their own version of history, fomenting a distrust in government and in their country's collective understanding of their own history to create an alternate reality where they can rule legitimately while simultaneously promoting undemocratic authoritarian objectives. Professor Yasha Mounk at Johns Hopkins University defines a fundamental through line of populist thinking that includes a way of thinking about the world that holds that the only reason we have problems is because of a political leader that is corrupt and self-serving, cares more about various outsiders than they do about real people. And to fix these problems, a single individual who truly represents the people needs to be elected so that they can do away with the corruption, seize back power from entrenched elites, and get rid of anyone who stands in the way of the will of the people. This involves two key elements: anti-elitism, meaning that there's something wrong with the people in charge, and anti-pluralism, meaning that one leader alone represents the will of the people, and if you disagree with that person, you're illegitimate and you're a traitor to the people and must be taken down. And these ideas pose a fundamental threat to liberal democratic ideals of collective self-determination, meaning rule by the people, as well as individual rights and freedoms, including independent institutions like the media and separate checks and balances on presidential power. Two ways to further the populist cause and curb these perceived threats to the will of the populist leader is to foment distrust in the media and undermine the independence of the judiciary, to claim as the leader that you are the only one who can speak on behalf of the people, to be willing to push the confines of what's legal to the max in order to maintain power, and to be very adept at providing very simple answers to people's problems. The reason you don't have a job is because of immigrants. The reason you can't get ahead is because of affirmative action. The reason why drug use in your community is growing is because of Black people, etc. It's an us versus them mentality that posits that if you are not behind this leader, the one that speaks for the will of the people, then you're against us and we must take you out. It's truly wild to read about scholars dissecting the populism playbook because it makes me really question my theory that Trump is illiterate, because he follows it to a T in a way that seems too scholarly and accurate to be by happenstance. As Professor Vittorio Hoseley, who studies philosophy and political science, put it, it is an intrinsic danger in modern democracies that for many reasons, the erosion of the working class, the creation of a lot of people who feel declassed and not taken seriously in the globalized world, it is likely that pressure towards authoritarianism will increase everywhere. Hoseley points to 2016 as the year when this turn towards global authoritarianism picked up momentum. It was the year of the Brexit referendum, an attempted coup in Turkey, the election in the Philippines Philippines of a president who openly bragged that he would kill criminals and then pardon himself, and the election of Donald Trump, who openly bragged he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get away with it. The United States was recently added to the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance list of backsliding democracies. And the most obvious outcome of this rise in populism, where the cult of one leader trumps everything else, including logic, reason, and fundamental democratic ideals, is highly polarized countries. And this polarization can have devastating consequences for democracy, because it creates a country and an electorate obsessed with an us versus them mentality, with half of the population willing to follow a man who has claimed he's the chosen one. As Professor Jennifer Chapman puts it, he said he's super smart, a genius. He's established his image as the leader who is cleaning up Washington and the savior of the common person so convincingly that none of his supporters are looking beyond that to see that, in fact, many of the things he is doing are exactly the opposite. But that doesn't matter to a Trump supporter. And I think the reason for this is in part because he's established himself as a populist leader who represents the will of true Americans. But it's more than that. As one recent article out of Berkeley said, Trump followers exhibit a loyalty to Trump that is so intense and so unshakable that it exerts a cult-like gravity. In addition to the fact that Trump has openly courted cults like QAnon to such an extent that 56% of Republicans believe that the absolutely bizarre conspiracies being touted by QAnon are somewhat or entirely true, Trump himself has taken a cue from the behavior of cults and cult leaders in how he has implanted himself in the psyche of half of the electorate. Stephen Hassan is a mind control expert, mental health professional, and spent 2.5 years in the Mooney cult before being deprogrammed. He wrote a book called The Cult of Donald Trump, and drew some stark lines between cults and the following Trump has amassed. For one, a cult usually involves a venerated leader, someone who's considered king or godlike. Everyone's falling over themselves to praise the leader and be in the leader's good graces. They use loaded language that's evocative and creates a strong image in people's minds, while also being incredibly vague and lacking a clear definition, goal, or outcome that's based in reality. For example, lock her up, fake news, witch hunt, build the wall, the deep state, and make America great again. Cults thrive where its members are sleep deprived and bombarded with information overload, especially in silos where they're not receiving any information other than that which is being created and promoted by the cult. But Hassan is not the only person to draw links between Trump's followers and cult-like behavior. Robert Reich, for Now This, has also drawn the comparison, noting Trump's intolerance for criticism and dissent. And anyone who does take issue with Trump is called a liar, a traitor, a phony. Trump's tactics are also culty because he claims, and his supporters genuinely believe, that Trump alone knows the truth, using fear as a key ingredient to foment blind loyalty and consolidate his base. This, all while actively and publicly doing things against the interests of his supporters and in complete opposition to his promises, like cutting Medicare and Medicaid, lining billionaires' pockets, filling his cabinets with entrenched corporate executives and lobbyists who are arguably some of the deadliest crocodiles in the swamp he's claiming to drain. One tool experts use to diagnose the severity of cult-like behavior is the BITE model, which is an acronym that stands for Behavior, Information, Thoughts, and Emotional Control. If we look at the factors in each, a number of them stand out. Under the B for behavior, one important tactic is major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and/or self-indoctrination, including the internet. Under I for information, notable tactics include use of deception, minimizing or discouraging access to non-cult sources of information, and compartmentalization of information, meaning categorizing ideas and doctrines as either insider or outsider ways of thinking, and extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda. Under T for thoughts, notable tactics include requiring cult members to internalize the group's doctrine as the one and only truth, using loaded language and cliches to construct knowledge, stop critical thoughts, and reduce complexities into platitudes and buzzwords, manipulating memories and creating false memories. Make America great again? What does that mean? When are we talking? Great for whom? It doesn't make sense. Also, rejecting rational analysis, critical thinking, or constructive criticism, forbidding critical questions about the cult leader, doctrine, or policy, and labeling alternative belief systems as illegitimate, evil, or not useful. And then finally, E for emotional control includes tactics like instilling fear in the cult members, including irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning the leader's authority. This threat of shunning is an incredibly powerful tool, as cult members have often distanced themselves from everyone in their life before the cult, so they have no one, and they have placed the entirety of their lives and personalities in this cult. It explains why, for example, sons are willing to turn their own fathers in for participating in the January 6th insurrection. They were too far gone, they'd pushed away their own families, and there was a distinct difference between their life, actions, and beliefs before Trump and after Trump. All of these tactics have been used to certain degrees throughout Trump's campaigns and presidency, and they continue to unite a shocking number of people. One thing that struck me in all of these tactics is the importance of information and controlling the narrative via the information that cult members consume. This is a huge part of Trump's tactics, made all the easier because of the siloing of people by political party in this country. If he wants to control the narrative for his base, all he has to do is post on Truth Social or call Fox News, and he's reached pretty much all of them. Internet conspiracy theories then do the rest. He's masterfully used the media in ways that would make any cult leader proud. Trump has employed all of these tactics and then some, leading his followers to believe that every bad thing that happened while Trump was president was not because of his policies, but in spite of them. That he's an innocent man forever being framed. He's capitalized on the us versus them mentality, causing his base to catastrophize the threats of the left into existential dangers that require a literal uprising to overcome.
The Democrats are guilty.
By an illegal faction of our government, aka the Biden administration.
You're gonna start a damn war, Joe Biden.
If they infringe upon what is yours.
Biden would have gotten elected if the votes were real.
We have got to wake up and fight. Fight like you've never fought before.
And at this point, 8 years into Trump as candidate and president, his supporters are so entrenched that even if, on the off chance, someone were to get through to them to make them care about logic and show them the illogical nature of their beliefs, they're too far gone. As a recent article in The Atlantic put it, for Trump supporters to call him out would be to call out themselves, and that's too painful for too many people. The greater the ethical compromises we make, the fiercer our justifications become, and the angrier and more frustrated we get at those who won't go along for the ride. Essentially, half of America has signed a deal with the devil in aligning itself with Trump, with the hate and resentment he espouses and proliferates, and now must double down because it's too painful to admit they were wrong. And this is the case for Trump supporters both in the electorate and in the government. His ideology has pushed the GOP so far to the right that anyone who's moderate or, just generally somewhat sane within the GOP has been alienated or forced to concede to the far-right faction. This is evidenced by the general lack of condemnation of Trump despite his behavior, and in the scenario where we have a 2020 redo, a Trump versus Biden race in 2024. Polls are currently showing Trump and Biden in a dead heat for the White House. But who knows what that'll look like in 15 months when we're actually at the voting booths. 15 more months of legal actions against Trump. 15 more months of him using those indictments and prosecutions to his advantage, to further his narrative that he and, by extension, his followers are being persecuted by the deep state, and that he and he alone is the savior, much like Jesus, who must rise again to fight for his people. And he's repeating his playbook from 2020 by alleging that he is the undisputed frontrunner and leading by substantial margins. That's factually inaccurate, but it doesn't matter. Not to his supporters, at least. And this is what he did over and over again before the 2020 election. And it got his followers amped up and scared to such a degree that they were willing to attempt to overthrow the government for it. Keep an eye out for him trying to delegitimize voting methods like mail-in ballots and drop boxes. That's the next step from his 2020 playbook. And who knows what'll happen in January 2025 if he once again loses to Biden. The Washington Post recently gave me some heartening news in that the three main tactics that Trump relied on to try to overturn the 2020 election are no longer available to him. For one thing, in 2020, he tried to replace electors in key states via Republican-controlled state legislatures, based on the absolutely batshit independent state legislatures doctrine that says basically that the Constitution gives state legislatures more power than the federal government to determine how elections are managed. The Supreme Court did away with that doctrine this year in their Moore v. Harper decision. Another tactic he used was attempting to appeal to Republicans in key states to quietly put a thumb on the scales. A number of key states flipped Democratic in the midterms, so there are fewer Republicans for him to appeal to. And he's literally about to be indicted for doing that, so people will be on high alert for repeat behavior. And then the final tactic was the attempt on January 6th to stop or reverse Biden's final certification in Congress. This time, however, Trump's VP, Mike Pence, won't be the one overseeing the certification. It'll be Biden's VP, Kamala Harris, which closes out that avenue for Trump to attempt to overturn the election results. There's also the helpful fact that Trump is not the president, so there's no transfer of power to be had in the event that Biden wins again. Keeping the status quo is much easier than peacefully transferring power. And yet, even so, after the 2021 insurrection, we still managed to transfer power. So I'm grasping onto those wisps of hope for dear life, okay? Despite the fact that some journalists are worried that without these quasi-legal avenues for Trump to use to try to overturn the 2024 election, he'll opt instead for a more overtly revolutionary approach. As Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who studies 20th century populism and fascist leaders, said, it takes prosecution and conviction to deflate their personality cults. Which then begs the question, could Trump still be elected president if he's a convicted criminal? I made a whole video about this, but while it's unprecedented for someone to become president while actively incarcerated, it doesn't appear to be technically unconstitutional. There are only 3 requirements to be president. You must be born in the United States, over 35, and a resident of the US for at least 14 years. Candidates with criminal convictions have run in the past. And socialist Eugene V. Debs, who you'll remember helped organize the largest strike in history in the late 1800s, ran for president while in federal prison in Atlanta as the nominee of the Socialist Party in 1920. He was convicted for violating the Espionage Act, which Trump is also charged with. He won 3% of the vote, which is pretty good for a third-party candidate. And given how much Trump has gained in the polls since his indictments, there's a very possible world in which Trump runs for president from prison, and a less probable but still possible world in which Trump is elected president while serving time in a federal penitentiary. That being said, there is one pesky hangup in the 14th Amendment, which prevents anyone from running for office who has taken an oath of office and thereafter engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the country, which makes Jack Smith's prosecution all the more pivotal truly for American history, because if he's found guilty of instigating that January 6th insurrection, it could bar him from running for office again. Absent that conviction, scholars have been weighing in on whether Trump could pardon himself. The general answer seems to be that he could try, but it would be challenged in court and likely overturned. Plus, a presidential pardon only applies to federal cases. The criminal case against him involving the Stormy Daniel hush money is a state case, and in the event that he serves jail time for that case, which is unlikely but possible, Congress could invoke the 25th Amendment to impeach him for being unable to perform his duties, because he'll be in prison. Either way, in the event that Trump wins the election in 2024, we would be in for a lengthy series of court battles that could upend our stability and make us seem even weaker on a global scale than we already are thanks to his first presidency. So friends, it doesn't look great. Please go vote.
People who can't think for themselves easily fall victims to that false identity, mandated by the select few at the top, which is what is causing the increasing polarization of American population. But this is mostly happening to baby booming demographics of developed nations, such as the United States, that makes up a significant portion of the population, which will be changing in 20 years. The Trumpian tragedy of America successfully infected such demographics of America using the proven psychological tool of identity politics that undermines democratic values. The false identity that American Christianity is wrapped up under has become so repulsive to most Christians, and therefore they're abandoning it altogether at an alarming rate, having no value to modern life. American Christian tradition differs from Christian traditions elsewhere, and the proliferation of American tradition is camouflaged, and therefore the Christian traditions elsewhere are unaware of American Christian tradition. The closed groups of Christian tradition within the United States are also completely unaware of American Christian tradition. By engaging in identity politics for decades, American Christianity, deviating from its primary objectives, have dug their own grave. American Christianity's solidarity with Trump's candidacy for U.S. presidency as a result of identity politics, culminating in a coup attempt on January 6, 2021, was in effect the construction of its own coffin.